The White House press briefing room was abuzz with the usual pre-briefing chatter. Reporters from every major outlet filled the rows of seats, phones in hand, eyes shifting between their devices and the podium. It was Thursday, a day that typically passed without much fanfare. But today, the room carried a different energy, half anticipation, half tension. The reason? Karoline Leavitt, President Donald Trump's newly appointed White House press secretary, had been trending for 2 days straight, not because of any official policy update, but because of a spoof segment by late-night comedian Seth Meyers. In a skit aired on Late Night with Seth Meyers, Seth had donned a blonde wig, stood behind a mock White House podium, and impersonated Karoline's recent fiery exchange with a CNN reporter. He exaggerated her confident, pointed delivery and mocked her defense of Trump's economic agenda. The crowd had laughed. The video had gone viral. And Twitter had exploded. But not everyone was laughing. Karoline Leavitt had watched the clip in her office, her jaw clenched. She wasn't new to criticism. After all, she had served as a fierce Trump campaign spokesperson before her appointment, but this skit was different. It wasn't just satire. It was personal. The clip made her look like a clueless cheerleader instead of a trained communicator. Her voice had been distorted. Her policies were misrepresented. And to top it off, Seth Meyers had ended the sketch by saying, "Tune in next time when Karoline explains how 2 + 2 equals patriotic freedom dollars." The studio audience had roared. But Karoline didn't rant on Twitter. She didn't issue a press release. No, she had a better plan. That morning, she walked into the real briefing room in a crisp red blazer, her hair tied back, eyes focused. The reporters sensed it instantly, something big was coming. She took to the podium and opened with a calm, practiced tone, "Good morning, everyone. Before we get to questions, I want to address something that aired on television recently." A hush fell across the room. The CNN correspondent leaned forward. The Fox News crew started recording. Karoline continued, "2 nights ago, Mr. Seth Meyers decided to use his platform to run a parody of this very room and of me personally. He wore a wig, changed his voice, and made light of serious topics affecting Americans across this country." She paused, scanning the room. "Now, I understand that comedy has its place in American culture. But when that comedy turns into misinformation, when it mocks not just a person but the truth, it ceases to be satire and starts to become propaganda." Gasps echoed. A few hands shot up. But Karoline raised hers first, silencing them. "No, let me finish. Mr. Meyers joked that I equated 2 + 2 with patriotic freedom dollars. Allow me to correct the record." She pulled a chart from behind the podium, something no one expected, and flipped it onto an easel beside her. This chart shows the actual breakdown of the Trump administration's small business tax cuts and their effects on middle-income job growth over the past 12 months. We're talking about real lives, real families, and real paychecks. Not punchlines. The room fell silent again. A New York Times reporter tried to interject, but Karoline was on a roll now. "We don't take ourselves too seriously. But we do take our responsibilities seriously. This podium is not a prop. This room is not a stage. And the American people deserve facts, not cheap shots." As the briefing went on, Twitter lit up again, only this time, the hashtags were different. Hashtag Karoline claps back. Hashtag press secretary power. Hashtag Seth jester. Karoline had turned the tables. The woman many in the media had dismissed as too young, too loyal to Trump, too bold, had just dropped a truth bomb with the force of a political earthquake. And in New York, watching from his green room before taping that night's episode, Seth Meyers blinked at the screen and muttered, "Uh-oh." Karoline Leavitt hadn't just responded, she'd reclaimed the narrative. By Friday morning, every major media outlet had covered her rebuttal. Conservative media praised her composure and fire. Even some left-leaning pundits admitted reluctantly that the young gun in the red blazer had outmaneuvered a seasoned comedian. Clips of her press room statement exploded across X, formerly Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. A video titled "Karoline Leavitt Schools Seth Meyers with Facts" gained 3 million views in less than 12 hours. Political TikTokers were lip-syncing her lines. Podcasters devoted entire episodes to breaking down her speech. But Karoline wasn't finished. That Friday evening, she made an unexpected appearance on The Ingram Angle with Laura Ingraham. "Karoline, welcome," Laura said, her tone part amused, part impressed. "You certainly stirred the pot this week." Karoline smiled calmly. "Thanks, Laura. I'm not here to stir pots. I'm here to set records straight." "And Seth Meyers?" "Well," Karoline chuckled, "I think he bit off more than he could script." The crowd laughed. But Karoline, again, turned serious. Late-night comedy used to unite Americans with humor. Now it's used as a weapon to divide and distort. That spoof wasn't just about me. It was about mocking everyone who believes in this administration, who cares about truth over narrative. Laura leaned in. So what's your message to Seth? Karoline looked straight into the camera. Come to the White House. Sit in the back row. Watch a real briefing. You might learn how facts work in the real world, not just in a writer's room. The clip was reposted across the web, sparking what some were calling a press secretary versus pop culture showdown. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, at NBC Studios, Seth Meyers and his writing team were reeling from the backlash. Guys, Seth said, pacing the room, we've clowned on presidents, senators, even Dr. Fauci. But this girl's getting cheerleaders on Wall Street Journal op-eds. Are we missing something? One of the writers, a younger staffer with a nervous smile, said, honestly, she flipped it. She used the sketch to platform her own message. We got played. Seth sighed and sat down, rubbing his temples. We either double down or we pivot. He chose the former. That night's episode included another jab, a shorter spoof, more cautious. Seth addressed the camera. Karoline Leavitt says I should come to the White House to learn how facts work. I'd love to if they actually had Wi-Fi that wasn't filtered through the 1950s. The laugh track rolled, but even Seth could tell it didn't land the same. The audience clapped politely. The moment passed. But across the country, Karoline's supporters doubled down. Conservative radio hosts like Dan Bongino and Charlie Kirk praised her as the new face of the Trump movement. Tucker Carlson, now streaming independently, called her more dangerous to the left than Kayleigh McEnany ever was. And then came the twist that no one expected. The invite. That Monday morning, as Karoline entered her West Wing office, her assistant handed her a sealed envelope. From NBC, the assistant said. Karoline opened it slowly. Inside was a short handwritten note from Seth Meyers himself. Dear Ms. Leavitt, I believe you invited me to sit in on a real press briefing. I accept. Seth. Karoline blinked, then broke into a grin. Game on. She knew this wasn't just about correcting a joke. It was now about exposing a bigger truth, how mainstream entertainment had turned facts into satire and platforms into punchlines. If Seth Meyers was going to step into the real arena, Karoline was ready with the spotlight, the podium, and the facts. The White House briefing room had seen its fair share of high-stakes moments. There were fiery exchanges, tough questions, and the occasional moment of levity. But nothing prepared the reporters for what happened that fateful Tuesday morning. The door swung open and in walked Seth Meyers, not in his usual late-night attire, but in a crisp suit, a noticeable nervousness in his step. He was accompanied by a small camera crew from NBC, capturing every moment for the world to see. The reporters, most of whom had covered dozens of presidential briefings, exchanged confused glances. Karoline Leavitt stood behind the podium, her eyes fixed on the newcomer. She knew the stakes. This wasn't just about a joke. This was her chance to prove that the White House and the Trump administration weren't just punchlines to a late-night comedian. Welcome, Seth, Karoline began with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Glad you could make it. Seth, visibly uncomfortable, gave a small wave to the room. Thank you, Karoline. Happy to be here. The press corps, sensing the drama unfolding, leaned forward in their seats, eager for this unusual confrontation. Karoline wasted no time. So, Seth, I assume you've done some research? We've got the cameras rolling today because we want the American people to see how a real briefing works. Seth nodded awkwardly. I've read the news, watched the briefings, and, of course, I've seen he hesitated, glancing at his team. Your performance in front of the press. Karoline, unfazed, continued. I'm glad to hear you've been paying attention. As I said before, this podium is a place for truth, not mockery. So, let's do this. I'll take your questions and you can see how it feels to answer them honestly. Seth cleared his throat. All right, let's see what we've got here. He turned to the reporters in the room and after a brief moment, a hand shot up from a familiar voice. Karoline, the reporter asked, what's your take on the recent economic downturn and how the administration plans to respond to the spike in unemployment? Karoline was ready. She flipped open a folder, pulled out a well-organized chart, and explained in detail the administration's actions. She discussed the tax reform bill, the latest initiatives to support small businesses, and how the unemployment rate had dropped since the beginning of the year. Seth listened intently, but he couldn't help himself. Hold on a second, Karoline, he interrupted. You're telling me that a tax break for millionaires is going to help a single mother working 2 jobs? Really? The room went quiet. A few gasps rippled through the reporters. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, Seth Meyers, the comedian, challenging Karoline directly. Karoline didn't flinch. She stood tall, looked directly at Seth, and replied coolly, "Seth, I understand comedy, but let's stick to facts. The tax cuts put money back in the pockets of hard-working Americans. The average family saw more than $1,000 in tax relief last year. Not all tax breaks are for the rich, as you seem to suggest. Maybe if you looked at the numbers instead of making jokes, you'd see the benefits." Seth laughed nervously. Okay, touché. But Karoline wasn't done. "We can talk about policies all day, Seth. But the truth is, you've turned the issues we're trying to address into a joke. You mock the work we're doing without truly understanding it. You make it easy for your audience to laugh without challenging them to think. That's not comedy. That's manipulation." Seth's grin faded. He had been caught in the crossfire of his own satire, and the weight of the moment was starting to settle in. "I think it's fair to say we've turned this into something more than a joke," Seth responded, a bit deflated. "But hey, maybe the audience likes a little drama with their politics." Karoline, never one to miss an opportunity, replied with a smile, "Maybe. But here in this room, Seth, it's about responsibility, not drama." The reporters who had been silently observing the exchange were now taking furious notes. The tension was palpable, and the question on everyone's mind was whether Seth Meyers could recover from the jabs Karoline had thrown. But before Seth could respond, a hand shot up in the front row. It was from a conservative-leaning reporter eager to add his voice to the growing momentum. "Karoline," the reporter asked, "what do you say to those who believe the media has unfairly targeted you for your association with President Trump?" Karoline took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Seth's. "I say this, the media has targeted me. Not because of who I am or what I stand for, but because of what I represent. I represent a voice for the American people, a voice that doesn't apologize for standing with our president. The press has spent years tearing down this administration, and now they've turned their sights on me. But they can't shake me, Seth." Seth, attempting to regain his footing, nodded. "I get it. But let's be real, Karoline, people watch late-night comedy to escape from all of this. To laugh, not to sit through a lecture." Karoline smiled. "Then maybe you should consider doing your comedy after the briefing, Seth. Because right now, this is about informing the public, not making them laugh at things that matter." With that, the room erupted into a mix of applause and stunned silence. Seth Meyers, for the first time, had no witty comeback. Karoline Leavitt had done what no one expected. She had turned his mockery into a showcase of her own power, proving that behind the podium there was no place for jokes. There was only truth. As the day went on, the news networks replayed clips of Karoline Leavitt's performance in the White House briefing room. It wasn't just another press briefing, it had become the defining moment of her tenure as press secretary. The media was buzzing, the online world was ablaze with opinions, and even President Trump was watching. In his private office, Trump leaned back in his chair, a slight smile on his face. He flicked through the channels, seeing the numerous reactions pouring in from all corners of the political spectrum. He knew his press secretary had delivered a powerful blow, but he also knew the media would spin this to create more drama. That didn't bother him, though. "She's got guts. She stood her ground," Trump muttered to no one in particular. "That's what America needs, someone who can stand up to the liberal establishment." As the evening wore on, the commentary continued. CNN, while critical, couldn't ignore the fact that Karoline had turned the tables on Seth Meyers. The New York Times had called her rebuttal refreshing in its online opinion piece, though it claimed she still had much to prove. But it was the conservative outlets that truly celebrated her, hailing the press secretary as a rising star in the Republican Party. However, despite all the praise and accolades, Karoline remained focused on the task at hand. She was back at work early the next morning, reviewing notes for upcoming briefings. She hadn't allowed herself a moment to bask in victory. Her office, which usually hummed with a soft, continuous buzz of activity, felt quieter today. The staff moved with a sense of respect, almost reverence, as they saw how unflustered Karoline remained. Her assistant, Maria, knocked and entered the room holding a coffee mug. "Karoline, there's been a message for you," Maria said, handing over a tablet. It was a message from Seth Meyers himself. The subject read, "A note after yesterday." Karoline tapped the screen and Seth's message popped up. "Karoline, I didn't expect that. Honestly, I didn't. I thought I was prepared for the briefing, but you handled everything with such confidence. You turned what was meant to be a joke into something serious. I want to say something that probably doesn't happen often in our world. You won. I respect your passion. Let's not make this personal. Seth." Karoline read the message and a small, satisfied smile crept across her face. She had expected Seth to remain defensive, to brush off the challenge. But instead, he had acknowledged her strength, something few in the media would ever do for a woman in her position. She quickly typed a reply. Seth, thanks for your honesty. I believe that all of us, regardless of political affiliation, need to stand by our convictions and hold our leaders accountable. Humor has its place, but there's a time to be serious. Take care. Karoline. She sent the message, then went straight to work on her next task. The job wasn't over. She had made a statement, but the real work lay in shaping the administration's message for the coming weeks. The media frenzy. As Seth's apology continued to circulate, it set the stage for a showdown of a different kind. The media's tone began to shift. It wasn't just about poking fun at Karoline or mocking the Trump administration anymore, it was about respecting the integrity of the press secretary's role. Even some of her critics, now faced with the raw power of her composure and argument, found themselves having to reconsider their approach. But not everyone was ready to accept Karoline's victory. Late-night hosts continued to take their shots. Jimmy Kimmel made a subtle jab on his show that evening, calling Karoline an up-and-coming conservative star who really knows how to dodge questions. But it was clear that Kimmel's remark had lost its bite. The comparison between him and Seth was apparent. The audience responded better to Seth's honest admission than Kimmel's thinly veiled sarcasm. Meanwhile, conservative news channels couldn't help but revel in Karoline's dominance of the narrative. Newsmax, One America News Network, and even Fox News ran extensive segments on her victory. The network pundits couldn't stop praising her as a leader who held her own against a media that had spent years trying to discredit her. I think Karoline Leavitt has officially arrived, said one Fox News anchor, his tone filled with admiration. She's a star. And make no mistake, Seth Meyers and his crew are gonna have to rethink their approach. As the days passed, Seth's own show continued to experience the fallout. The ratings remained steady, but the commentary surrounding his show shifted. Many wondered aloud if this public exchange had signaled the beginning of a new era in political comedy. Is this the end of political mockery? Some pundits began asking. Is the public getting too tired of seeing politicians, particularly women in power, continually reduced to jokes? The answer was unclear. But one thing was certain, Karoline Leavitt had disrupted the status quo. She had turned the tables on a comedian who thought he could easily mock her and her administration. A new phase begins. The media storm over the briefing clash started to subside. But Karoline knew better than to relax. In the weeks that followed, her presence in the White House grew more formidable. She wasn't just a press secretary anymore, she had become a symbol of resilience in a turbulent political landscape. Her popularity among Trump supporters skyrocketed and her social media following surged. Despite the fierce criticism from left-wing outlets, Karoline's message had resonated with millions of Americans. It wasn't just about defending the president, it was about defending truth and dignity in politics. Her team continued to refine messaging, especially for the press briefings that followed the Seth Meyers episode. The press room began to understand Karoline was a force to be reckoned with, and no one was going to make her the punchline again. The weeks following the White House briefing had been a whirlwind for Karoline Leavitt. The media storm she had sparked with her stunning takedown of Seth Meyers had reshaped the political landscape. But it was clear that this was only the beginning for her. She had proven herself not only as a dedicated press secretary but as someone who could stand toe-to-toe with the best in the media world. The press room, which had once been a battleground for words, had taken on a new atmosphere. Karoline had earned the respect of both allies and adversaries alike. The reporters who had previously questioned her judgment and experience now recognized her as a formidable communicator who could navigate the most challenging situations with ease. Even the most critical journalists were forced to reassess their approach. After the viral briefing, Karoline's messaging became more direct and sharper. She had learned to strike a balance between delivering the administration's policies and defending the president against the constant barrage of media attacks. However, it wasn't just her professionalism that had captured attention, it was her personal strength and ability to stay unflappable in the face of public mockery. Karoline had taken a joke intended to discredit her and turned it into a defining moment in her career. The White House briefing room, a place of power. It was an early morning briefing when Karoline stepped to the podium again, her usual confident stride unwavering. Today, there was a palpable sense of anticipation in the room. The reporters seemed to know that she was no longer just the press secretary, they were facing someone who had shown the world that she would not be easily swayed. A reporter from the Washington Post raised his hand, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the room. Karoline, after everything that's happened over the past few weeks, do you feel like the media is beginning to give you and your administration more credibility? Karoline's eyes narrowed as she carefully considered the question. "I think credibility is something that has to be earned every single day," she replied, her voice steady. "It's not given based on opinions or biases, it's earned through results. And the Trump administration has delivered whether they like it or not." Her words carried weight, and the room fell silent as the reporters took in her response. This was the Karoline they had all come to know, a woman unafraid to stand up for what she believed in, no matter the consequences. As the briefing continued, Karoline handled the questions with precision and grace. She spoke about the administration's success in job creation, tax reform, and foreign relations, reinforcing the message that the president was focused on the people's needs. But every question seemed to come back to one topic: Seth Meyers and the infamous White House briefing. It was the elephant in the room, and no one could avoid addressing it. Karoline, ever the professional, took it in stride. "Seth and I have both made our points, and now it's time to move forward," Karoline said, her tone calm yet firm. "We're here to do a job. I've said my piece, and now I'm focused on the work that needs to be done." But even with her composed response, there was a lingering sense that Seth's mockery had only served to solidify her position. The brief moment of laughter from the late-night host had been transformed into a moment of power for Karoline. The media aftershock. The aftermath of the confrontation between Karoline and Seth had caused waves that rippled through the entertainment world. Talk shows and news outlets continued to debate the exchange for weeks, but it was clear that the press secretary had become a figure of undeniable influence. Late-night hosts, recognizing the shift in the media landscape, began to adjust their tone. Comedy had once been the sharpest weapon in political commentary, but Karoline's response had shifted the balance. Satire had met its match in her unyielding professionalism. Seth Meyers, for his part, had handled the aftermath with a mixture of humility and deflection. He appeared on his own show to address the situation, acknowledging that he had underestimated Karoline's ability to turn the tables. In an almost apologetic tone, Seth remarked, "You know, I've made a career of calling out politicians, but I've got to give credit where it's due. Karoline Leavitt had me on the ropes. That wasn't a fight I expected." The audience responded with a mixture of applause and laughter, but the tone was different now. The power dynamics had shifted. Seth's acknowledgement wasn't just about his own defeat, it was a recognition that Karoline had won the respect of the nation. The long-term impact. As the months went by, Karoline's political profile grew. She became a regular presence on conservative talk shows where her measured responses to the media's criticisms were celebrated. Her combative yet calm approach to the media earned her a reputation as one of the most effective spokespeople in Washington. But perhaps the most significant shift came within the Trump administration itself. Karoline's handling of the briefing with Seth Meyers had demonstrated a strength that few had expected from someone so young and relatively new to the role. The president took note. Karoline had not only protected the administration's interests but had turned a moment of ridicule into a resounding victory. In the years to come, Karoline's legacy as press secretary would be remembered not for the controversies she faced but for her unwavering dedication to her role and her ability to face down critics, both in the media and beyond. Her fight against mockery, satire, and underestimation had made her a symbol of resilience for conservative America. She was no longer just the press secretary. She was a force to be reckoned with. The media may have poked fun at her, but Karoline Leavitt had won. And in Washington, that meant everything.